Just waiting for her to get me. I think we're there. Testing. Hello, everybody. Hi, everybody, and good afternoon. And welcome to the Descendants of the Founding Fathers. So we're supposed to have two of these guys here, but one of them is running late, so we're gonna get started. And but first of all, I'd like to introduce the moderators for this and our founding father descendant. So first of all, immediately to my left, we're honored to have her here at the festival this year, and it's Ginny Sebastian Storage, the President General of the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution. Give her a big hand. And we're equally thrilled to have Pamela Wright here, who is the honorary President General in the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. There we go. And this is really a big deal to have these two ladies here, in particular for all the events that they've done, and particularly this panel of the Descendants of the Founding Fathers, with, of course, no surprise, you all know, but for America 250. So we're really pleased to have this program. And I'd like to introduce our two descendants of the Founding Fathers. We have my friend Richard Gatchell, who is a descendant of President Monroe. And we have my other friend, Mike O'Meara, who is a descendant of President Madison. So with that, I will hand this over to our two wonderful moderators, and please enjoy the program.
Thank you, Larry. Well, thank you for coming out today. Pamela and I have been looking forward to this. You hardly ever get to interview descendants of such noble and important founding fathers, so we're thrilled to be here. We are with the Daughters of the American Revolution, and some of you may have heard this already, but Daughters of the American Revolution was founded in 1890. We're an organization that is 190,000 women strong worldwide with almost 3,000 chapters. And our mission areas are historic preservation, education, and patriotism. And we are very proud of the outreach that we have. For America 250, one of our primary projects is a $2 million donation to the Trust for the National Mall's Cherry Blossom Endowment. So we want to make sure those cherry blossom trees in D.C. continue to thrive for years to come as a symbol of our nation's capital where we were founded. But we're thrilled to have you gentlemen here. We appreciate you sitting down with us. And why don't we go on and get started with Richard? And, you know, it must be incredible growing up from such an important descendant ancestor. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the stories that were passed down to you through the family.
Sure. Test 1, 2. Great. This is on. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before I even answer that, the fact that we just connected 3 minutes ago on the fact that you live in Fredericksburg and the Monroe Museum is in Fredericksburg, and right there on Charles Street. And I mentioned Scott Harris, and you go, oh yeah, you knew Scott and everything. So it's you never know where these connections. It's just 1 degree of everything, you know, when it comes down to it, or very few degrees. But as a child, I think I was around 6 or 7, and my grandmother, who's sort of the staunch historian of the family, said, Richard, you're related to someone that I think is very important, and I want you to know this, but I don't want you to ever tell anyone. Because I don't want you to ever let it go to your head or whatever, but you need your, and my grandmother is named Elizabeth Courtwright Monroe Emery Gatchell. It's a mouthful, and she was named after her 3rd great-grandmother, Elizabeth Courtwright Monroe, James Monroe's wife. And so she had some legacy gowns and things, and I just received a plate that was in the White House during the time that Monroe was president. And so she kind of stamped it into me, and also my father, but they also said, don't, it doesn't make anybody better or worse or anything than anybody, just you need to be a good steward of a relative and you know, treat your life with some respect and pride of that. So it was ingrained in me privately in the home, but never to be public, because our names aren't the same too. So I just, it was not important to me. In fact, some friends of mine now that I've known since age 6, I said, I'm heading out for this thing. And the guy goes, you're related to a president? I never knew that. And That's the answer I want right now, because I didn't need to tell anyone in high school that stuff. It wasn't important. So it's a very personal journey and a sense of personal pride.
What about you, Michael?
Testing, 1, 2, 3. I, like you, have a 3-minute story, except I had 3 minutes before I got here to find out I was on the panel. So I knew I was on the 4:30 panel. I didn't realize I was on this one. Mine was interesting because my grandmother was named Helen Dolly Madison, and she grew up all her life with a copy of the Declaration of Independence that was handed down to Madison, a watch, we've got a decanter, and some other documents. My mother was born Helen Bogus, and my mom really didn't care a lot about it. And so when I'd go to my grandmother's, I got a lot of history, and she talked about it a lot. Around my house growing up, it was never really brought up. So I saw a question for later is going to talk about when history was talked about at school, did you bring it up? Never thought about bringing it up. But also did because I knew of the heritage, paid a lot of attention and learned about it when I was young.
So when did y'all decide to bring it up? At what age did it become important, Michael? As an adult, probably?
At different times, when I got deeply involved in it, my mom passed away in 2014, and so I ended up with the documents and the watch and things like that, and don't have heirs to pass it on. Madison didn't have direct children, and it appears in going back and looking, he had 5 or 6 siblings. They didn't have a lot of children, so there are not a lot of Madisons out there. And so I made a determination, I don't want to end up eventually having these things, who knows where they end up, because there were 200 copies of the Declaration of Independence that were given to the signers, to the presidents, and some other notables. They only have about 50 of them that have been identified. And until 2015, they only had 49 that had been identified. So I started doing research on it. Didn't know for sure that document was actually James Madison's. So I ended up having to get my confirmation that I was a Madison descendant. It was made tremendously easy because my grandmother was a DAR. And so all I had to do was prove I was related to her. She had already proven she was related to Madison and obviously other people going back in those times. So because of that, I started studying about different parts of history. I did get the Declaration validated by some gentleman I talked to on the phone that told me there are little engravings that will tell me whether or not it was a W.B. Stone, which was one of the originals. And at the point in time I figured it out, I contacted someone that manages a lot of the document collection for David Rubenstein, and ultimately went to the Smithsonian. It spent 9 months getting restored back to as close to the original as it could be. I got to travel up there, spent a lot of time with them learning the history, and got to a tour of all the document restoration that they do up there. And so I went from a passing knowledge of history to a very detailed knowledge of that history and the collection and just the whole world that is DAR and the Society for Presidents and all of that. So it was kind of a late education in life.
Don't you love that story? All you DAR members, you know you love that story. Yeah. And how about you? When did you
start telling people?
Yeah.
Probably about in late 20s. I didn't really start for a while. I did a lot more history then. I stopped in the James Monroe Museum, and I knocked on the door and said, I'm related to James Monroe. He says, who are you? And we went up, and it was a single light bulb on the 3rd floor, and he kind of throws the whole family tree out and unscrolls it. This is a true story. This is I forget his name before Scott Harris. John Pierce was a curator, and it was this dusty thing, and I go, I'm right there. Dick Gatchell, I'm his son. He goes, oh, okay, so he filled me in, by hand onto this rolled out scroll. And I had some business down there regularly, so I would stop in and we became friends. And every now and then, when he had a speaking engagement or something, he goes, I need a relative. I'll show up, I'll read a little bit about it. And my father was very educated and a good public speaker about James Monroe. And the reason we are here today is because 21 years ago, this crazy guy named Nicholas Inman called the Monroe Museum, because he started with 1, 2, 3, got the 5th president. He goes, we don't know anybody from Monroe. We'll call the Monroe Museum. And they got Scott Harris. And Scott Harris goes, oh, I've got a guy for you, Dick Gatchell. And so Dad called me and said, there's this guy that called me from Missouri, and it could be either really bizarre or really fun or both. I'm not sure. and I said, I'll go, but I can't leave my 2 kids. So I brought my daughter. So he called back and goes, good news is I can come, but the bad news is I'm +2 now. So so we came out. We've been coming ever since. But it was at that time, probably in my early to mid-30s, that I gained the confidence to be able to learn more about him and speak about him. And when asked, I will tell you about it, but I'm not going to lead in with it. And there's a little anecdote. And I think half this town has met my daughter, Emery Gatchell. When she was a senior in high school, she's back in Baltimore, and Jonathan Sands, who some of you may remember, who was Winston Churchill's great-grandson, who came here many times, and he's since passed probably 6 or 7 years ago. He's a wonderful guy. And he ended up in Baltimore, and he was my guest in Baltimore, and we go to her badminton match. And there she is playing badminton. It's kind of like a golf sport. It's a quiet sport. And she's in the middle of her badminton match, and she just hears this English accent say, come on, Emery, hit that shuttlecock. You can do it. You can do it, mate. Hit that shuttlecock. And everyone's like, who's the British guy that's yelling to hit the shuttlecock? And then she got squeezed into the corner. Well, it's this guy I know through my dad. Well, how do you know? Who is he? He's related to Winston Churchill. Well, how do you know him? How do you know him? And then they backed because I'm related to James Monroe and like her students. She was a senior, and no one knew this. And it was kind of, she had to come clean when she was kind of forced to it, but she never said, let me tell you about me. So it's a long answer to the fact that was her moment. Mine was kind of in my 30s, and since now, and I lean into it now, and I'm very proud. I think I have 6 speaking engagements in the next couple months, and I can thank Tweed for that. I can thank Massey. I can thank Nicholas and a number of other people for that, for giving me the confidence that they want me to be with them.
Well, the DAR, especially in Virginia, has done projects at both your ancestors' home and law office. And of course, the National Society of Children of the American Revolution just recently had a project at the law office. In 98 to 2001, the Virginia Daughters of the American Revolution restored the cemetery at Montpelier. So we have crafted, of course, this image of these 2 men, but maybe you could tell us something that maybe we don't know about them, something that's humorous or that has come down through the family that is really a unique bit of information about them.
I'm still exhausted from the last answer.
Tidbits that that weren't passed down by the family, but it's ironic at 6'3" that I'm related to the shortest president. So apparently he was about 5'4", I believe, and small in stature and not healthy in stature, which was why he was so involved in writing and reading and everything. He is given credit, of course, for the father of the Constitution, but he also wrote the Bill of Rights as well. So he was obviously not athletic with his size, statute, and he was sick a lot of his life. But I mean, that's why he became such an intellectual and things. Don't really have any comedic stories to tell about him. I don't know if he had a great sense of humor or not, but the stories that sort of passed down through our family were kind of connected through the watch and the documents. The document has an interesting history, which when it got passed to David Rubenstein, got totally mischaracterized. The document had come to my parents' house in the 60s. They had it checked by Sotheby's, and they said, really, there's no, historic value to it. There's no financial value to it. And so it literally got rolled up and was in my parents' house until I was about 10 or 11 years old. And, I was horrified. I thought, well, this is an old document. If it's 200 years old, we put it up on the mantelpiece. We had it, framed, hermetically sealed. It was up there 2 weeks when my brother threw a pillow at me I ducked, it hit the frame, it fell and cracked, and we put it in a box, and it literally for 30-something years sat in my parents' bedroom behind a dresser. And so ultimately, many years later, when she moved down to Houston, where I was living with my wife, we ended up, keeping it there for a while. And then when she passed away, I thought I've got to do something with it. And it was an extensive process to have it restored. It was fascinating to hear about it. And even the people in Houston that removed it from the frame had never really done anything of this historical consequence. But once again, in talking about it, and then actually when David Rubenstein took possession of it, he made an announcement about it. Well, it hit, some news, not a lot of news, but it did hit news. But it didn't say about him taking control of a document that was in the family. It said document, rolled up 35 years. Family doesn't know what they have. I mean, you read it and you would have thought we were clueless.
I did.
We didn't know what it was. We didn't know historical consequence. We just discovered it. And we didn't know that when he heard about it, he said, I'm very much interested. Spent time at the Smithsonian. It's in Philadelphia now. But we weren't these naive idiots from Louisville, Kentucky that didn't know what we had. We just hadn't done anything about it for all those years. The watch I had was a Urban Jurgensen, which is a Swiss-made watch. Didn't have a face, didn't have the casing on it. The inside was beautiful gold, and when you click the top button on it, it actually chimed on the hour and quarter hour. On the back, when you opened it up, it said number 146. And so, I thought, okay, I got to see what the history is with this watch. And so I reached out to the company. Turns out they're the oldest continually running watch manufacturer in the world. They're not the oldest, but the others have taken 50 years off and things. Talked to the CEO and met him in New York about 3 or 4 months later with the watch. Turns out they make handmade watches. And so their watches sell for $20,000 to $200,000 nowadays. But at the time he said, we may have the actual prints and design of this watch. He said, if we don't have it for this watch, we have it for watches made before and after. And he said, we can restore it to where it was before. They couldn't find the actual papers on that particular watch, but determined it was made in 1812 based on the ones before and after. And 1812 was when Madison was president. So that confirmed the fact that, it was his watch. And it wasn't cheap, but it wasn't near as much as you would think. They restored it, and it's a beautiful watch now. So had that restored. I've got, a couple of other, I got a presidential decanter, which has 18 stars. The 18 stars, each star denotes a state, and there were only 18 states in the Union when Madison was president. So got lucky in some of the validation that we got that these were real, because of course everybody has historical documents, especially in this day and age with 3D printing and all the high quality printing. They're discovering new documents that are false every day.
Well, I have to say, I think you're the perfect person to inherit, because he dug deep and figured it out. I mean, that's impressive, actually.
It got me very interested in it, and then opened me up to a world. Going to the Smithsonian, there's 30 people that work there that are all historical experts on the 1700s to the 1860s. And it's mind-blowing that this whole team works on this stuff, and this is their life, and how much they know about it. And then, of course, I come there, and I don't really want to talk a lot, because I'm afraid anything I say will be incorrect, because, of course, I have master's degrees, we got graduate degrees. I mean, it was intense on how much knowledge there was, and yet you're just never aware as you walk around places like this, Tampa, where I live now, that these types of experts exist, and this is their world. But it's amazing what you can learn from them.
I want to find something rolled up on a shelf at home, don't y'all? So, how about you? Have you found anything like that?
Just, there are two little anecdotes. One is, it's not an anecdote, but people ask about the private lives. James Monroe loved his wife, and she loved him. They had a deep adoration and love affair since when they met to within, when they died very, later in life. And she was not a healthy person. And she had seizures a lot when they were president, when they're in the White House, and he was called on to entertain. And if she had a seizure, and I think she was diagnosed with epilepsy, but they didn't really know what it was then. So their eldest daughter, Eliza, had to step in and be, on his arm to greet guests. But he always protected her from the people that might use that information against him. And she always appreciated that. And they just adored each other. And Elizabeth Courtwright, her father helped start Wall Street. So she was from New York City. She was a socialite from New York City. And here comes this hick from Virginia, this 6'3" guy, and she's 4'11". And they get married and they go off to Virginia, and he's like, what happened to my daughter? Where'd she go? And but he did take care of her, and then he and his father-in-law ended up having a great relationship. That's one thing. There's another little anecdote, I think, that people love to hear about. But when he was president in his second term, and he was up there in age, maybe, kind of 60-ish or so, which was, in 1823, that means a lot. And he was having a discussion in the White House with someone, and if I knew better, it was a discussion that was heated. They disagreed on something. And the guy that he was discussing this with pulled his sword out and went after Monroe in the White House. Monroe had to grab an andiron out of the fireplace and defend himself and call for help for the guards who came in and, pulled them apart. No one was ever hurt or anything like that, but that happened back then in the White House. When they disagreed, they pulled a sword and he wanted to kill him. And he said, you know what, I know we disagree on this, but we're gonna have to agree to disagree, and I'm not gonna press charges, and don't pull a sword on me again. But he didn't, he could have sent him to jail or to whatever, and he goes, no, I know you're passionate about it, and I respect that, but it got heated there. But they solved problems. They found a way to always compromise or find where everybody got a little bit of a win, and you don't hear about that as much. But to think that happened in our White House, I think is kind of fascinating.
So is there anything about your ancestors that the public believes that you might want to correct, that you think is misunderstood? That's a big question, right?
Well, I'll give you a timely one and an appropriate one. And this is good impact. But the Monroe Doctrine, right? We've all heard of the Monroe Doctrine. James Monroe did not sit down one day and say, you know what, I'm going to write the Monroe Doctrine. He just didn't do that. Every year, the president went to Congress, and they had their articles of discussion, the people's articles with the Congress. And he went and he said, here's the state of what I feel. And the Congress and the president didn't interact that much. And it was written in December of 1823. It was the 6th articles to Congress. And within there was documentation that was the bulk of what would later come to be known as the Monroe Doctrine. But he didn't write all of it. It was written mostly by John Quincy Adams and James Madison. Thank you. Thank you for that little nod on that. But it was not known as the Monroe Doctrine until the late 1840s. So 25 years passed until that nomenclature hit that document, and people extracted parts of it and said, hey, we should defend our hemisphere. So it was not, he did not intend to write it, but it was written by he and other people. But I want to take this opportunity to say thank you. For that. But also his greatest accomplishment, which he's given credit for, is also rebalanced by the fact that he was employed by this country in various roles since he was 18 years old, from 1776 to 1826. For 50 years, he held a role in this country of either being a governor, a senator on the assembly, or Secretary of State, Secretary of War, whatever it may be, for 50 straight years through 1825. And that, he's not recognized for that. So I'm not going to say, don't tell anyone about the Monroe Doctrine, right? So so that's our little secret, but it comes and goes. But that's a fact, I think, that is, it balances out.
So do you think your ancestors would have expected this country 250 years later to be pretty much governed by the same documents that they helped implement so many years ago? Or do you think they were just eternal optimists and knew it was going to happen?
Probably at the time, given the turmoil that had gone on, 30 years, around a 30, 40-year period there, they probably didn't expect there'd be a country by 1850, much less for it to go on now, and those documents to be mentioned, and Monroe Doctrine's been mentioned in the news the last, 4 or 5 years. The Constitution is mentioned, and, they're probably debated as much sometimes now as they were, in that huge gap between then and now. But, I can't believe in their wildest dreams they, expected it to last 50 years just because of all that had gone on to put it together. And it wasn't like everybody came together and said, oh, let's form a country, let's have these governing documents, and we're all going to agree, and everybody voted and said, great. There was a lot of debate. There was a lot of dissension. There wasn't an agreement. A lot of different interests governed, what was going to happen. And so the fact that it held together as a body, long enough to get some solidarity behind it, and then to continue on for 250 years, I can't imagine in their wildest dreams they would have guessed that.
Right. I agree with that sentiment, and I think the perspective when I try to put myself in James Monroe's shoes, he lived through the 7 Years' War, the Revolutionary War, and the War of 1812. So to think that this thing's going to last 250 years when 3 wars happened in your lifetime, he was the first president in his first term. He toured the country twice on horseback. He wanted to go up to the Canadian border and over to Detroit and the Great Lakes. He wanted to see how can we defend ourselves. We've been in 3 wars in my time. I need to know mountain ranges. I need to know rivers. I need to know where to set up forts. We will be in a state of war because that's what they knew. And he wanted to know how to defend our territory and also to grow it. He added 5 states during his presidency. So it was a time of growth. How do we grow this thing and how do we protect it at the same time? But if they thought that it would go for 250 years, I don't think they thought that. And looking at the great civilizations before them, they all had a peak and a valley. If you look at the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians or the Chinese dynasties, they all had a peak and a fall. And I don't think that they had that much long throw in them.
So are either of you involved in any lineage organizations like Sons of the American Revolution or, yes? No?
I am just now joining the board of the Society of Presidential Descendants, so that's really my first board or first involvement in anything of depth.
That's a good place to start for sure.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Well, I'll start with you all in that I want my daughters to join the DAR.
That's exactly where I was going.
yes.
How many females do you have?
And I mean, I really do. And this is another reason that's given me the passion to kind of accelerate that. And I think they just need a push, And my sister just joined it a year ago in Williamsburg. And I'll see her on Tuesday at the gravesite of James Monroe to celebrate his 268th birthday in Richmond. So, yes, get me back to the original question. I got sidetracked. Society of the Cincinnati is one I'm very proud of. Society of Cincinnati is a patriotic group founded by George Washington right after the Revolutionary War, when there were 6,000-ish officers who had served for at least a year. And he said, I got good news and bad news. The bad news is I can't pay you. I have no money. I could print it, but it doesn't mean anything. But I do want to start a society for you all called the Society of the Cincinnati, and I want it to be a society, a perpetual society of brethren, help, and participation. So if somebody got sick, or if their house burned down, or if someone died, they would take their children, and they would rely on each other the way fraternal brothers do. And in fact, a bunch of those, the men that were original members of the Society of Cincinnati went out to Ohio. And the name Cincinnati is founded today as Cincinnati because it was founded by descendants of officers that called it Cincinnati based on that. But the real Cincinnatus, and I think I may have mentioned this before, Cincinnatus was a Roman warrior, and he led troops. He was a farmer first, but then he was always called on for war. And he was farming one day, and they said, the Huns are coming, you must help defend Rome. And he left his plow in the field, and he went and he led the troops and defended Rome for 34 days. After that, he said, we've done our job, and he went back to his plow. Farmer first, warrior second, and that's how Washington was. And that society is well and strong today. And I'm proud to be a member of that. And that gives me great joy to share stories with people, other patriots, this sixth, seventh generation descendants of patriots. And we all have the passion for our country, given the good and the bad, right? There's everything there. But we all care about it and want to continue to try to do something good. So that's something that means a lot to me.
So in the years after the Declaration of Independence was signed, inflation went from about 12% to 250%. How do you feel like your ancestors sacrificed? What did they sacrifice? How were their families impacted by what they had entered into and agreed to fight for, basically? Yeah.
Well, Madison didn't go to Washington a wealthy man and did not come back any wealthier, and actually struggled for the remainder of his life to keep up with his mansion, as it was called, which it was definitely good size, but and to be able to find ways to support his life, his family, and you know, you hear different stories of different presidents over the years and what they came in with and what they left, and you know, his was really purely an intellectual, not being a strong man, although he had a large farm. You know, he wasn't a strong man, and really just depended on the help of others in many cases. Montpelier was actually sold to the DuPonts, and the DuPonts owned it for a number of years, and actually went out and I had not seen pictures of it until about 8 or 10 years ago, built this huge structure kind of around it that was supposed to be very gaudy, and it sold back to the you know, now the foundation that continues to run it and manage it. And over the years, they basically tore down the structure and restored it back to the original condition and the original, you know, mansion that it was built to be. So, but the DuPonts and the Madisons and the foundations were supposed to have been close, and over the years, the DuPonts were big supporters of Madison.
Well, the good news was they were poor. They didn't have any money to lose. So when inflation went up, they lost 200% of nothing. So so they were just not a wealthy family, right? So they moved here. I mean, his father was first generation, and they didn't have money. And I think when he was president from 1816 to 1824, he had a budget of $25,000. That budget was to cover all the costs to maintain the White House, all of your cost of entertainment for the year, wardrobe for his wife and his 2 daughters and for himself, and all the cutlery and all the entertaining for $25,000. So he couldn't get it done. And he had lived in Paris twice as an ambassador, and he knew that you needed to dress well and throw parties and you know, have a little pomp and circumstance about you. So it was a very difficult budget he was put on. The presidents, Ulysses mentioned that today too, there just wasn't money for that kind of thing. And when he died, he served the country for 50 years, and after he was president, he lived in Oak Hill in Virginia. Then when his wife died there, he moved to New York City and lived with his daughter, and he died on July 4th, 1831, penniless. He had no money. 50 years of service, and he had no money. So inflation didn't, there was no pot of gold that they lost. But when it comes to inflation, when he was president from 1816 to 25 or 17, there was a panic of 1819. It was a big sort of you know, economic bust, and it was about how are you going to solve this? And he was not a true economist, but he asked his economist friends, don't get involved, like just sit back, and it took care of itself. It corrected itself. If he had jumped in to try to change rates, do things with the currency, it may have really doubled down on bad. But he let it ride its course, and this free economy found its way. And I think other people have referenced that, you know, in these times, to say, if you just let it sit, it'll find its balance. Maybe not the best answer, but that was an inflationary period that was quelled by letting the capitalist system work for itself.
And that's how it still works today. Most of the time, it's just, we ride it out. Yep.
So, Michael, do you have anything else you want to share that you can think of?
I was, like I said, caught a little bit by surprise on this. So I really didn't have my thoughts collected with the great information to share. Other than, I mean, this whole event is amazing. It really opens your eyes as to the interest in things. And I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, which was a relatively good-sized city in a state that's a lot of farm country. And to come back here and to see the interest in the history and how everybody's involved, and people like Richard come here once 21 years ago and now come back every year is amazing. And it says a lot to the community and the warm open arms that everybody has, but it also says a lot about, when you get here, you really get a piece of Americana and interest in history that we don't always get when we're out there living our normal lives. When we work and have children in school, you forget about these things. And this is a nice, 3 or 4 day period where you think about where the country was started. And hopefully more of the country are going to get that. And when Freedom 250 happens this summer, a lot of people will learn a lot more about American history. Might only be for a couple of days. They may move on with their life, but hopefully they'll learn a lot in that period.
Right. Each year, I've missed 4 years, but each year I come here, it's got a slightly different flavor to it of the characters, the people I meet, and I'm so glad to meet you, because our propositus, or our ancestors were 4th and 5th president, and there's not a massive representation outside of Jefferson, who has between Shannon and the other guy. He hadn't been here in years, but that's. Thank you, Chris Truscott. Yeah, coming here, but to have this connection, and you've really taken to it too, in terms of reading and understanding, and it's and I'm gonna, when I sit at home and I think about, am I doing this to feed my ego or something like that? And the answer I want to find is no, because if you can make a difference in someone's life, and I'm gonna, Jack, stand up. That guy right there is why I come here. 5 years ago, I met that guy, and he came up to me so excited about James Monroe. That guy studied James Monroe and knows more about James Monroe than anybody I know, and he came up and was so excited to see me. And by me just befriending him, I felt I made a difference in his life. And so it's the Jacks of the world, and guys like you, I love you, man. You're great, and you motivate me. So thank you. That guy's incredible. So that's why we all come here, to make a difference with someone. And I've learned a lot about the DAR. Like I didn't know a whole lot about it. So the educational aspect of me ingesting information, if I can share something, then that makes me feel good.
Well, Pamela and I have been thrilled to sit and talk with you, but we're going to open it up to a few questions from the audience, if y'all don't mind. Yes, ma'am.
Would you tell the story about Monroe and Lafayette? Can you hear me?
Can you tell the story about Monroe and Lafayette?
Yeah,
Yes.
well, there's a bunch. They actually became friends during the Revolution, and they had a lifelong friendship. And so they fought in the war together. And then years later, when Monroe was an ambassador to France, he went over. He had 2 trips over there. The one, he landed the day after Robespierre was beheaded. So tough time in Paris, coming in from America. And Lafayette's mother and aunt and sister, I believe, had all been beheaded. And Lafayette's wife was in jail. And I think she was on, I hate to say the chopping block, but yeah, no pun intended. And Elizabeth Monroe and Madame Lafayette had become friends in America and over the years. And against her husband's orders, she got the finest carriage. And Andrew Oak knows this story very well if he's in this room. And she got the finest carriage and her finest dress and went to the prison where Madame Lafayette was and said, "I demand to see Madame Lafayette." When they opened the doors and she heard people coming down towards her cell, she thought they were coming to get her, to behead her. And she went in, they opened it up, and they hugged and cried. She said, "I'm here, I'll do anything I can." And the people that were at the prison said, "That's the wife of that guy that came over from that new country, and they're kind of here as an ambassador, so maybe we shouldn't kill this one. We'll kill another one." But her life was spared by Madame Lafayette, 4'11", getting in a carriage and going to a prison and demanding to see her inside a prison very risky at the time, at the Reign of Terror. And she was kept there for a few more weeks and then released and lived a long life. And there's a whole other story about how they lived and how they were imprisoned in Prussia later on after the Napoleonic Wars and stuff like that. So, she did help save Madame Lafayette's life.
Nice. Question over here?
I missed in the beginning your exact names. I know in the course of your name is Richard Dashel?
Richard Gatchell Jr.
Gatchell.
My father's Richard Gatchell, yes.
Okay, so what is your exact relationship then to the
A
president?
direct fifth great-grandson, so I'm 7 generations away from James Monroe. James Monroe had 2 daughters, so that the name is gone right there. So Mariah Governor had, don't make me go through the next 3. But then there was James Monroe High School, and then Marianne Governor, and then I missed 1 or 2, and then my grandmother, Elizabeth Courtwright Monroe, my father, Richard Emery Gatchell.
Okay, and I missed your name.
Michael Gardner O'Mara.
Okay.
And so Dolly and James Madison had no children. So I'm the 5th great nephew of James Madison.
And I think we got time for one more question if we have another one out there. Hang on, sir, just 1 second. There you go.
I studied Monroe Doctrine and Geography in school. That was one of my favorite subjects. Didn't the Monroe Doctrine have to do with the rest of the Americas, like South America and Central America?
Say again,
He wants to know if the Monroe Doctrine had anything to do with the other Americas, like Central America, South America,
the whole
etc.
hemisphere. He said, we're putting a line down the middle of the Atlantic. Don't come over here to North America or to South America. We are not your fishing ground, your hunting grounds for imperialism to Europe. He said, you've already done enough with, Brazil and with all the various countries in Colombia that they were trying to colonize. And he said, the line starts here and don't come over anymore. And it's come into play about every 15 or so years. It comes into play when a European country tried to take over a Latin American country. And so it's a document that has, it's got teeth for about, close to 200 years now.
Well, then it had a lot to do with immigration then. Is that right?
Not as much with immigration, but about taking over the country, about the government, about how they were governed. Because they could come over, go into a room and say, all right, we're taking over now. You're now a subject of the British Empire or of the French or of the Italians or whomever. And they said, we are not your next fertile ground for imperialistic takeover.
Well, I would like it if you could give a nice round of applause. And I would just like to say a couple of words here. First of all, it's such an honor to have you two here as moderators. I mean, what better for America 250 than to have these two ladies here? And my friends, everything you said, it was just excellent. All the things you said about the festival and about all that we all do for history. And I thank you both for that, for what you do for history. Thank you. And I just wanted to say one more thing. Diane and I were good friends with President and Mrs. Carter for over 20 years. And whenever we were at an event with them, and especially at church with them, President Carter would end by saying he would like you to take the Carter Challenge. And what he meant by that was to do something kind for someone that you know, someone that couldn't get out of their house, and he would say, bake them a cake and keep a piece for yourself, but then take them the rest of the cake. So I would like you all to do the Cherry Blossom Challenge today and follow President Carter's advice there. But also I'm going to add one more thing to it. Our new relationship with the DAR is so great. And for those of you who know or may not know that I wrote a book on the First Ladies with the DAR. So I talk about the DAR a lot. And I get a lot of people coming up to me and saying, I don't know about the DAR, or tell me more about the DAR. So I'm going to ask you in this America 250 year to take the Cherry Blossom Challenge and talk to everybody you know about this wonderful organization. And so you might want to look into, you may want to check your genealogy and see if you could be a member of the DAR. And if you can do something for history and something for our great nation and all that it stands for. So take that challenge and talk about this great organization, the Daughters of the American Revolution. Thank you so much.